I'm Adam from the Army Painter. Join me today as we paint up the Owlbear. In honor of the hashtag Paint Your Owlbear competition that we're going to be running through the rest of this month, my friends back at the Army Painter headquarters in Denmark were having such a blast painting up their Owlbear models. I wanted to join in on the fun too. So today I'm going to show you how I'm going to paint up a snow-themed Owlbear. The paints that you're going to need for this tutorial are our Brush On Gray Primer, Warpaints Fog Gray, Gorgon Hide, Matte White, Quick Shade Blue Tone, Quick Shade Wash Mixing Medium, Skeleton Bone, Arid Earth, Strong Tone, Snake Scales, Poisonous Cloud, Green Tone, Matte Black, Hardened Carapace, Uniform Gray, and Ash Gray. For anybody that knows me, it's no secret that I am a huge fan of using the airbrush. It's a fantastic tool to help speed up your painting process and pull off some great effects when used in combination with other tried and true techniques like base coating, edge highlighting, dry brushing, and of course washing. I get asked all the time, do the Army Painter Warpaints work through an airbrush? And in this tutorial, I'm going to show you just how well they do. I began by priming the model using our Brush On Gray primer through the airbrush. Now you may be wondering, how do you thin your war paints for airbrushing? Well, you're going to use your preferred thinner. You can use water. That was new. That gold cap was new. More on that one later. So apply some of your favorite thinner. I like to work in a ratio of 1 part thinner to 2 parts paint. As you can see, pouring this fog gray into the airbrush. I give it a good stir with an old brush. And what you really want to make sure is that you have a nice milky consistency to your paints, like you see here on screen. With our paints properly thinned down, we're going to begin pushing that fog gray war paint through the airbrush as a base coat. This fog gray is going to be a perfect tone for that icy snow Yeti Owlbear effect that we're going for. I like to push at about 25 psi through the airbrush. This is great for getting nice controlled pressure and controlled lines through the airbrush. We're just going for good even coverage of this fog gray across the entirety of the model. Next, with a 50-50 mix of fog gray and Gorgon Hide, we're going to apply this to the raised areas of the model. As you can see here, I'm just applying this to the top and the crown of our owlbear's head and just the crest of his chest. I'm also going to follow the bridge and ridges of our owlbear's arms and the shoulder to really reinforce those higher areas. I'm not applying a whole bunch of actual light, realistic light logic while I'm pushing these highlights onto the model. Rule of cool is the overriding rule when you're painting a model as fantastic as the Owlbear, the exclusive Owlbear from our D&D Monster Paint Set. As you can see, I'm just hitting the raised areas on top of his thighs here, just pushing back. You want to leave some of that fog gray in the recesses. This is going to build a nice contrast, a gradient contrast across the model. Just nice and easy, light pressure. Allow that paint to dry. You don't want to glob this on. That's the beauty of the airbrush, is that you can apply multiple thin coats across the model. And after finishing the chest, we're just about complete with the first highlight. Now we're moving right to straight Gorgon Hide, not a mix this time, and we're going to focus this even more on the raised areas, just like if you were edge highlighting a model. We're just going to focus the radius of these brush pulls to the most raised areas on the arms, on the face, and the tops of the thighs. As you can see here, we're probably going to apply this to the edge of the feathers and of course down the spine of our big monstrous owlbear. Again, just focusing on the most center areas of our initial highlight, trying to work that gradient from a nice base tone to an extreme highlight. Now that we're finished applying all of our base tones and highlights with the airbrush, it's time to add some realistic depth and shading to the model. And for that, we're going to be using the washing technique. I'm going to be using Quick Shade Wash Blue Tone and some of our Quick Shade Wash Mixing Medium to thin it down. Using the Army Painter wet palette, I'm going to put 1 drop of our Quick Shade Blue Tone to 3 drops of our quick shade wash mixing medium with a little bit of water on the brush just to thin it out a little bit. I'm going to mix this so that we have a nice light blue wash. This is going to be the perfect tone for this icy Yeti owlbear that we're painting up. Once we have the mixture to the right consistency, using our monster brush from the Wargamer range, we're going to apply this liberally all over the model, making sure that we work that blue tone underneath the creases of the feathers. There's a lot of it. Usually washing is a quick and easy step. I urge you to take your time here and make sure that you work that wash into all of the recesses. This is really going to bring out the depth, contrast, and shading on this model. While you're applying this wash, you want to be careful that you don't allow the wash to pool too much into the recesses. Fortunately on this model, because it is so textured, it's pretty difficult to do that. You're not going to get a whole lot of pooling, but if you do see it begin to pool, just move that brush, take that brush and move the wash around to evenly distribute it across the details on the model. Allow that wash to dry. It does take a little bit of time because there is some retardant agent in there to allow it to move across the model. So once it's dried, we are going to apply a dry brush of matte white, and we're just going to take our matte white paint, we're going to load up the bristles of the brush, remove the excess paint on a paper towel or a piece of paper, and gently flick the bristles of the brush across the raised areas and the feathers on the owlbear model. This model is perfectly suited for dry brushing. As you can see here across these feathers, simply working up those highlights with a few simple brush strokes. I'm using the hobby dry brush in particular here. Those are the ones with the red handles, but any of the dry brushes, including our Wargamer dry brushes, will suit you just fine here. With our dry brush complete, we are going to add an even more refined highlight. Go ahead and take some of that matte white and apply it to your wet palette, and as you can see here, it's perfectly thinned down. You want a really thin consistency because we want to have ultimate control as we're applying these highlights to the model. I'm using our Wargamer detail brush. This has a nice fine point, and when you thin your paints down, it's going to run very smoothly. We're just focusing on the raised areas of each of the feathers on the owlbear. One simple trick is to take the edge of your brush, and when you find these very finely detailed edges on the feathers here, you can just drag the edge of the brush alongside, creating a nice, simple, and effective edge highlight. We're also going to use our detail brush and our matte white paint to pick out some of the details around the face. I always urge painters to focus on the face because that's where your eyes are drawn when you first look at a model. We're going back to the wet palette this time for Warpaints Snake Scales. This bright, almost neon green is going to be a great color to contrast off the whitish blue tones on our owlbear as we give him a really ghoulish, almost mutant look. We're going to paint in around the areas of the eyes first just to give it a nice base tone, and then paint in the tongue. As this is a very bright, almost neon green, I do suggest that you apply 2 to 3 thin coats to really build up that color without obscuring any of the details on your model. I've been trying to find a reason to use Poisonous Cloud for a long time, and this was the perfect opportunity. I'm going to use this bright neon, almost toxic greenish yellow to just focus in on the center areas of the eyes and, of course, the tongue to really make this neon green effect pop. Next, we're going to apply quick shade green tone to the eyes and the mouth. This is really going to add some definition to the areas. As you can see, I'm getting some of this green tone into the feathers around the face, and that's okay. Don't worry about it. This is only going to help to pull off that glowing eyes effect that we're looking to achieve. Just apply this liberally and make sure that it is not pulling up on the eyes or tongue. Now we're taking Poisonous Cloud and we've thinned it down through the airbrush. You see I have the airbrush pointed very closely to the model, very light pressure, and I'm just pushing this Poisonous Cloud underneath the brows of the eye. Yes, I'm going over top some of the areas that I previously painted, but that's okay. That's what we're looking for. We're trying to make this glow, and adding that wash earlier in the stage only makes this glow effect more realistic. Back to Poisonous Cloud with our detail brush. We're just going to reinforce the highlights on the eyes here and on the tongue, Nothing crazy, just reestablishing that bright yellow tone. Now with a 50-50 mix of matte white and poisonous cloud, we're going to add an extreme highlight to the eyes and the tip of the tongue, and then we're going to use this mixture to pull out some of the highlights around the eyes. You remember I said it's okay if you get some of the wash and some of those green tone in the feathers around the face. Adding this highlight is going to help bring it back to white and make that glow effect look more realistic. We're simply just building up layers here, very simply, very carefully and patiently. It doesn't take very much time at all, but as you can see, by layering this 50-50 mixture, it's really pulling off a realistic glowing effect. Now that I'm happy with the eyes and the feathers or fur, whatever an owlbear has, I'm going to go back to using the airbrush. You see, the owlbear right now is looking a little bit too clean for me, and I want to make him look a little bit more monstrous. So I'm going to go back in with some darker tones around the feet and the claws to make it look a little bit grittier. Harden carapace now through the airbrush to add this gritty effect. I'm focusing this very tightly around the hands of the model, and I will go back later and do this around the feet and legs of the model. You notice I haven't used any masking materials here. You obviously can if you would like to, if you feel more comfortable with that, maybe as you build up your skill level with the airbrush. But I'm moving the model around in my hands and positioning it so that the gray paint does not go past and onto any of the white areas of the model where I don't want it to be. And now I'm just following up with a bit of matte black to reinforce that grittiness. This time I'm focusing it just around the knuckles of our owlbear. When I'm done, I will block in the feet with this matte black paint using a standard bristle brush. Using that matte black, I'm just going to block in the beak. I had trouble deciding what color I wanted to use here. Do I go with a yellow beak? But I figured a yellow or an orange beak or even a brown beak wouldn't contrast enough off of that neon green. But adding this blackish gray color beak to the model, it helps draw your eye and moves your eye around. You can see the blackish gray around the hands and now blocked in around the beak. It's helping to draw your eye around the model, and that black beak is really allowing that neon green tongue and eyes to set off the model. As I said earlier, I blocked in the feet, and now using almost the reverse fashion as we did the hands, that hardened carapace to blend that black around the toes of the model into the legs for that gritty, dirty look. Using the same color, we are going to add just a simple highlight, a very rough highlight to the black beat to really help this pop. This isn't rocket science here, it's just a very loose and rough highlight. You'll notice on your owlbear model that there are some ridges in the beaks, and you just want to focus on top of those ridges, just like I'm doing here on the toes, the knuckles of the toes or the claws of this owlbear model. This is a very rough highlight, almost like a dry brush, using the edge of the brush to trace some of that gray across the ridges of the feet. We're going to add a more focused highlight, this time with uniform gray. Remember those streaks and those ridges I was talking about on the beak? We're just going to trace those areas with this lighter shade gray. Remember to thin your paints as you will have more control, and control is everything when you start working on these fine details of the model. You just want to make sure you hit all of the raised areas of the beak and you'll be done. You just want to make sure you hit all of the raised areas of the beak with that uniform gray. Using the same paint and a larger brush, I believe I am using a regiment brush this time, we're going to block in all of the areas around the base of the model that are not a glacier or snow-covered rock. Next, we're going back to the paint rack for some skeleton bone. This is easily one of the best paints in our lineup. The coverage of this skeleton bone is incredible. We're just going to block in the claws and the fingernails on this owlbear model. Then using Quick Shade Strong Tone, everybody's favorite wash, we're going to apply this liberally across the claws on the model and the toenails, of course. And next we will use the same wash to wash and shade down the area that we painted gray on the base. We're just coloring within the lines here, nothing crazy, no crazy techniques. My 4-year-old could do this. All you're doing is coloring in the lines with this Quick Shade Strong Tone. We're going back to skeleton bone and just applying a thin down highlight. We're just trying to blend the skeleton bone across the washed areas for a nice bony gradient from that strong tone wash skeleton bone into a more natural, neutral, original skeleton bone. Take your time, thin down your paints here. You want this to be very thin. You don't want to obscure any of the details on these claws. I applied 2 very thin coats and ended up with a really nice result, which you will see in the next slide coming up. We're about to add an edge highlight to make those claws really pop using Arid Earth. This is a nice yellowy bonish color, very bright. You can see I maybe just went a little bit too far. That's the beauty of working with thin down wet paints. You can just take your finger and dab it off. No big deal, no harm, no foul. We're just about done with the model. I'm going to take some Battlefield basing glue, and with an old brush, I am going to water this down and apply it over top of the brown areas on the base, and of course on top of some of the rocks. While that's still wet, I'm going to grab some Battlefield snow, and I'm just simply going to dip the base into the Battlefield snow. Very simple. Now we have a snow base. Our Yeti is at home. I always recommend doing this over top of a sheet of paper or paper towel to make cleanup very easy, because you're going to want to tap some of the excess off. Make sure you get good even coverage of that flocking material all over the glue, and there you have it. Before I paint the rim of the base black, I do want to add some Battlefield frozen tufts. Now this really gives off the illusion that our owlbear is charging across a frozen tundra looking for his next batch of victims. Once you've based the model, your owlbear is now complete. I hope you join in the hashtag Paint Your Owlbear competition. It's going to be a lot of fun. Be sure to paint your owlbear, take some nice photos of it, and share it on your Facebook and Instagram using hashtag Paint Your Owlbear. All of the paints and products used in this tutorial can be found at your friendly local game store, online from your favorite retailers such as Amazon, or direct from us at www.thearmypainter.com. Remember, the magic in miniature painting is that it can be as simple or as challenging as you want it to be, but with a few simple techniques, you're sure to achieve some great results. I hope you enjoyed this owlbear tutorial. We'll see you next time.